What the hell is gender ideology?
A gendered soul, right? So there's a God somewhere with a line of bodies going male, female. Can't decide. Male, female, can't decide.
I'm special. Look at me. You will call me what I tell you to call me. Otherwise, you're a bad person. Now, if we're talking about poor ideas, we're going to have to talk about an extremely poor idea, and that's gender ideology. Now, for people who don't know what gender ideology is, stick around. You'll understand by the end of this segment. But basically, it's about trans women, trans men. Where did all that lunacy come from? It wasn't around 10 years ago. You know, we had transvestites who dressed up as women, usually for sexual pleasure. We understood that. But suddenly we've got men dressing as women, using women's bathrooms, competing against women in sports, and it's completely acceptable. Completely acceptable. How did we get there in such a short amount of time? And that's what we're going to be discussing now. But first of all, let me welcome my first guest of this show. It's a gentleman called Barry Wall, and he's the founder of a fantastic program online called The Winning Mindset. You need to check that out. But first of all, Barry, welcome to the show.
Great to see you, Nick. Great to see you.
Great to see you. For a split second, I almost called you Brian.
Well, Brian, the babe, they need Brian. Let's tell you.
And it's like, Brian, I've only known you 5 years. I'm calling it, and I'm almost calling you Brian.
Yeah, fabulous.
Thanks for coming along to my new show.
Oh, it's great. You've got a show.
Well, who'd have thought that a few months ago?
It's fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, a few years ago, I was cancelled, labelled a Nazi, told never to come back to polite society.
Yes.
And here I am now with my own talk radio show.
Amazing.
For all my guests, Brian, where's Brian come from? Barry will be coming on the show every now and again because he's got so much to say and he knows so much about this topic. So let's jump into this. First of all, in a nutshell, what the hell is gender ideology?
Well, that's for anybody that's new to this, and you get to the point in this particular scrap where you think there can't possibly be anybody who's new to it, and then you remember that 80% of the population has no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
It's the concept that essentially everybody has a gender identity, a gendered soul, right? So there's a God somewhere with a line of bodies going male, female. Can't decide. Male, female, can't decide. This idea that you have a gender identity, which is a nonsense concept. That's been invented purely to forward the agenda of a certain group of men. But gender identity is in your body, and that sometimes the individual that puts it in your body gets it wrong. And then you end up with a woman in a man's body or a man in a woman's body. So this gender identity is, when you talk to the activists who are trying to enforce this upon our society, is designed to trump sex. In other words, your gender identity is what you are, not the actual sex of your body. Well, we are our bodies, so that's rather a ridiculous concept from the start. But yet, it has infiltrated every corner of Western society.
Isn't a simple way of looking at this is, of course, we've got biological sex. Mm-hmm. You're a man if you've got XY chromosomes. You're a woman if you've got, is it XX chromosomes?
Yeah, right.
But gender ideology, gender identity, for me, is just another word for personality. Well, if you want to be a goth or a punk or a Hindu or whatever, it's something that you then claim upon yourself. It's got nothing to do with anything else. It's more like a personality.
Well, this is, in fact, it's deeply intertwined. You've highlighted one of the serious problems. First of all, the concept of identity is utter nonsense. Now, people say, well, it's important that you develop your identity. This is utter rubbish. Therapeutic language. We do not need to develop an identity. What you have when you are born and as you begin to grow up is that you have a personality. Over time, if you work at it, you will develop what's called a character. We all have our own characters over time. We grow up, we change. You sometimes hear people say, that person could do with a bit more seasoning. No, they're not quite seasoned enough, which means their character is developing. And we all develop our characters throughout our lives, right until we drop. Now, the concept of gender identity is designed to interrupt that process. Because remember, our whole point of gender identity and gender ideology is to bring people together under group banners. So it's actually that kind of collectivist thinking. So in other words, what they say to the young people, for example, is, yep, you've got to get yourself an identity. Decide what your identity is. Well, first off, that's a fool's errand. If you have an identity, it's because other people give it to you because of your behavior, which is directly linked to your character. So what it actually is an exercise in personal branding. So it's what brand do you want to portray? So they then build this ridiculous notion of who they are based on something called identity, as opposed to just living in the world. And that is what they then present to the world, usually via online social apps. And that presentation to the world becomes everything to them, and they protect it with a real fury, because that's their sort of public persona is what's online, not the actuality of who they are. In other words, they then go into brand protection mode, at which point you're just into a whole cycle of consumerist ideas based on the idea of an identity, which makes you part of a collective. It's a really weird conjunction of hyper-corporatism, real hardcore corporatism, alongside the most peculiar neoliberal and hard left collectivism that seems to be joining horseshoe theory, Nick, the concept that eventually comes together. I think what we're seeing is a new form of authoritarianism is emerging from this. But on the individual one-to-one level, what somebody does is they disassociate from the reality of who they are, and that disassociation is begun and maintained through the concept of that identity.
Interesting. It also sounds like to me there's a heavy dose of narcissism in here as well.
Oh,
as in, I'm special, look at me. You will call me what I tell you to call me. Otherwise, you're a bad person. The stench of narcissism is really strong here. But let's talk about how this started. Let's not go back all the way to the 40s, the 50s, and those sort of things. Let's talk about the more modern history of this. So we had the LGB, lesbian, gay, bisexual community. Which was never really a community in my eyes anyway. But they were lumped together because they had a sexuality that was unique for them. Then suddenly 10 years ago, 11 years ago, the T was added to it. And now we've got a Q&A, a plus and all sorts of stuff. But why was the T added, and why 10 years ago was a sudden change in this community who called themselves the LGB community?
It's an interesting one. From my perspective, the LGB was never a community. It was always a constituency. And the bringing together of those different people, because lesbians and gay men have very little in common anyway, but the bringing together of those different people was a collaborative endeavor to achieve equality under the law. That's what it was. It was a collaboration, and it worked very well. We got what we wanted. And by 2014, we were practically done and dusted, apart from a few little corners that needed sorted out. So we were there, right? Along comes Stonewall. Oh God, what we're going to do now? Instead of going, fantastic, we've done the job, let's stop. They went, right, we'll have the tea. Now, the original...
And can I just say, Stonewall is the LGB charity that's been fighting for gay rights for decades.
Yeah, well, they were formed in the wake of Section 28 in the 80s. So they were still around. They were still fighting. That fight continued, but the fight was done. And what they should have said was, we're shutting our doors. We've achieved our objectives, right? But they didn't. They went, right, so in order to keep going, we're going to add the T. Now, the T then became, which was, in essence, transsexuals and transvestites at that point. But the term transgender then appears. And that's when all hell breaks loose. So this was not something that was done willingly by most people. Even the founders of Stonewall, the original founders, said, do not do this. But no, they got rid of all them, and they brought this nonsense in. And in 2014, they began lying to companies and telling mistruths about what the law was in regards to the Equality Act and to the Gender Recognition Act, which led to, as you know, a recent High Court clarification on the meaning of sex. So they infiltrated using something called the Stonewall Equality Index, which masses of corporates signed up for, like a bunch of damned lemmings, without thinking about what they were doing. And this led to the creation of what I call affinity groups. I don't know whether you know this term. Affinity groups, where, you've now got a work group. This is the work group for the LGBTQ hands and knees and bumps and daisy people. This is the work group for the people who've got, 4 eyes. All these different groups in work that are designed around identity, which of course then introduces the concept that those different groups are going to scrap with each other because they are identitarian, because they are collectivist, and they're designed by the very programs they put in. They are designed to disrupt and cause problems, which of course then leads rise to the Q. That's what the Q's about. So Q standing for queer theory, which is a vile theory that states that there are no such thing as boundaries, and in particular that you have to break down those boundaries. That to destroy is to create, but most of all to break down the nuclear family and to break down the boundary between adult and child. That was Judith Butler said that to Owen Jones in 2021. So that's what they are. They're just anarchists, mostly people daddy problem.
TV is extremely dangerous to children and society in general. Barry, stick with us. We're going to have to take a break in right now. Welcome back to Wednesdays with me, Nick Buckley, here on the Pulse News Talk. We're talking to Barry Wall, founder of The Winning Mindset, and we're discussing gender ideology. Let's jump straight back into this, Barry. There's a term being used called forced teaming. And lots of people talk about that was how the transgenderism was managed to do so much so quickly because they jumped on board something else that had done all the hard work.
Absolutely correct. There is a marvelous meme doing the rounds at the moment, Nick, of the image of John Hurt's character Kane in Alien, and the creature on his face is in the blue and the pink of the trans colors. Nothing could illustrate it more perfectly. Forced teaming is the bringing together of disparate groups under one ideological banner. In other words, they'll put LGB became LGBTQIA+, when in fact what that is just simply a hard left, culturally Marxist organization. The same goes for BAME. BAME was brought together even though people under that would be people from Christian backgrounds, people from Muslim backgrounds. So it's the bringing together of groups under one banner so that the activists are then able to say, but we speak on behalf of BAME people. Well, nobody speaks on behalf of BAME people. Nobody speaks on behalf of LGBTQ+ people. These groups don't exist in any real way. They are simply constructs to enable hard left activists and neoliberal activists to call for what they want on the basis that they are a victimhood group. So generally they'll jump on victimhood groups. I think that's beginning to fail, but we'll have to watch very carefully that what they don't do is jump onto the one group of people that we should be helping the most, which is the disabled. That is my biggest concern right now, is they're going to jump. Now they've tried race, they'll jump and go, well, actually, we're going to team ourselves with the disabled. And I think that's beginning to start already. So they are parasitical in nature, and they have to be, because they can only force team because they have no history of their own. And it's not a grassroots movement. It's a top-down imposition. I mean, this is very much about imposing ideological fiats on people from the top down. Pronoun use, for example, calling men she when they're obviously a he, putting up with those men dressed as women practicing their fetishes in the workplace, putting up with teaching this to children in schools. So forced teaming is a very good wedge to enable them to get access to areas where if they just rocked up and said we're cross-dressers, they wouldn't get.
Sounds a little bit like the Trojan horse. That we'll disguise ourselves under these groups because these groups have been, even though these groups may have had to fight for decades to get equality or get where they want, but they've done the hard work. We'll just jump in the middle of them now, and they'll take us through the gates into Troy.
They get involved in whether it's a company or whether it's an organization, they place the template over the top, and it's always a template of power and oppression and oppressed, and then they spread that template by lying about history. So, for example, black people built Stonehenge, which is the latest one. It's just a huge lie. Martha P. Johnson was a transgender person at Stonewall in America. Well, he wasn't. He was a gay man. No, Alan Turing was trans because they forced him to take estrogen. They tell the most phenomenal lies, and they do so to bring with them this revolting collectivist ideology akin to Maoism or Stalinism. And they're on the pathway to do that. And most people don't even realize that it's all the same. Whether it's critical race theory, whether it's queer theory, whether it's, extreme environmentalism, it's all the same stuff. It's all the same stuff that we, whose backside we kicked in the 20th century, just enjoying a resurgence because of the laxness of academia in controlling the more extreme academics within their own institutions.
Now going, that's all very interesting, but it doesn't affect me. And I am the sort of person who thinks, I don't care what consenting adults do. I don't care if you dress as a woman. I don't care if you go to work dressed as a woman. I may find it uncomfortable, but that's my problem. That's not their problem. I want people to be free to live the life they want to, as long as it's within the law. Obviously, certain things like paedophilia, sexual abuse, the things where against the law, you don't get permission to do that. So where is the problem with people having a gender identity, or having a trendy personality? Call me Dorothy, I've got high heels on. What's the problem for society with this agenda?
Well, the main problem is that the way that we run our society is by categorization, and you can moan about that and rail against that all you like, but it's true. And if you were an alien looking at the world, the basic categorization would be, there seems to be two types of these creatures. And then there's small ones and big ones. Well, you would go with male and female, man and woman, boy and girl. It's not complicated. What this seeks to do is to unanchor us from that basic categorization. So to say it doesn't affect me is fine. It might not right now, but that's the kind of attitude that allows extremism to grow. What we've got to remember is they're teaching this to children. Okay. And that if somebody is practicing their fetish around you by dressing as Dorothy, you haven't consented to that. What if I turned up in a gimp mask with a dildo on me? Would that be okay? Same difference. It's a fetish, right? So people need to understand that this is not simply, that person is affecting me. They've got to look at the bigger picture, which is it's undermining the NHS data on sex, which means it's going to affect people's health. It is meaning that women are having to share we're having, and still are in some cases, sharing their spaces with these cross-dressing bloody men. And so it's not a matter of it's not affecting me. It's a matter of what world do you want the children that follow us to live in? It's people got gay men say, well, it's not affecting me. And I'm saying, yeah, but they're sterilizing gay and lesbian children. Where are you? What does it take? Well, there was a great quote, isn't there, Nick? The only thing it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to remain silent. And I think we have to be aware that this individualism is fine, but if we are also responsible to each other and to ensuring that the world that we built, and it is a fantastic world, is not undone by the same people that would quite happily trash every other aspect of the West in the name of their own vile leftist ideology.
Let me ask you this question. So when we talk about trans people, what we're really talking about are trans women, aka men. Why do we never talk about trans men, aka women? Are trans men a problem for society less so than trans women? Why do we not talk about trans men as much?
They are a problem for society in a different way. The problem with men is we're the ones that commit all the sexual offences. End of story. I mean, it's just a thing, right? It's just men, right? So men are a problem because they're bigger, they're stronger, they're the ones that cause the most violence against women and girls. And that kind of behaviour by a woman who's mutilated her body and taken drugs is much, much rarer. There's an example of it going on television at the moment in that I Kissed a Boy program, where they've got a predatory female in amongst a group of gay men, but she's rare. I mean, incredibly rare. And you see, when people mimic in life, when animals mimic in life, they do it for one of two reasons. They do it because they're the predator, or they do it because they're the prey. And with the men, it's often because they're the predator. With the women, it's because they're running away from something. What are they hiding from? Right. So that's the distinct difference there. It's a distinct difference because we are men and women, because we are our sex bodies, and because men have behaviors that other men need to keep in check. That's why. And these men are a threat to women, full stop. And the answer to that is more men.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good men who know. I mean, do you remember? I think it was last year I got myself in terrible trouble when I said I was a strong man who could kill, and everybody hit the roof. Whoa! And I was like, yeah, but I'm not going to. But you need me to control the men who will kill. That's the problem. And I think that men need to step up. Men need to step up and say to these other men, you need to stop this right now. We're not having it. Get out of this damn space. Go and put a bloody pair of trousers on and stop being a twat, and keep your fetish in the dank hole that you came from. That's what we need to start saying, because I think it's really important and take responsibility for it.
I think men have always taken responsibility for perverted men. What happened over the last 10 years was women told men that all this is acceptable. Not all women, the feminists, the liberal white women. So men have had a confusing message. So men don't know what to do, because on one side women are saying you need to do more, I'm in danger, and the very next day he meets 15 women who go, don't you do anything, you're a bigot, we want trans women or women. Men don't know what to do.
It is a very confusing milieu, and we discussed this on the Warrior Teacher program, on the Winning Mindset program, in some depth. This is about the different waves of feminism. I mean, if you were to go back and look at the work, for example, of some of the foundational feminists, I mean, Millicent Fawcett and her husband were an absolute powerhouse, the pair of them. They did extraordinary stuff on just about every level. And you go back and look at what they were doing. They were fighting for the stuff that you and I could get behind without any trouble at all. Now, you've now got this wave of feminists who are saying they're feminists. They're not really. Who say, you have to have trans women in your feminism. It's like, you're insane, right? You're a nut job. But then you've got the men, the gay men who are doing that, and the straight men who are doing it. Yeah, but what? It doesn't offend me. I'll accept the gay men. Well, that's obviously it's okay because that's a trans man. No, it's not okay. What's the matter with you? They're all infected with the same woke mind virus, right? So it doesn't actually matter who you are. It's the critical social justice mind virus that we must attack. And that attack will predominantly, when it comes to men, come from men, because women aren't going to stand up to a 6'4" bloke in a pair of high heels, right? Now, I've seen it work. I've been in a pub where one of these guys has gone to go in the female toilets, and my mate's gone, "Oi, where are you going?" at the top of his voice. And the guy went, "Sit," and just shot straight in the men's. Well, that's the way to do it. You know, we've forgotten the importance of shame. If you're a sex mimic and you're pretending to be something you're not, and I see you in public, I am going to shame you. That's what men need to say, right? We can deal with that. That's what men need to say. And I think it's really important that men recognize that each individual takes responsibility for themselves. And if you are turning up to work dressed up to the nines, like, you know, what you think a woman is meant to be, and it's just a caricature every time, then you are doing that more often than not for sexual gratification. We knew this 10 years ago. We knew it, right? We knew it. So as far as I'm concerned, you call it out. You just call it out. No, we're not having that. The guidance came out from the EHRC yesterday, and it's just a dog's dinner. It's just a dog's dinner, because nobody will say to these men no. So we need to repeal the GRA, and then we need to seriously amend or do away with the Equality Act, I think.
Bobby, there's lots of things in this country we need to repeal. There's so many poor laws, so many poor stuff going on. There's so much we need to repeal. Do you know what? I need you back on ASAP so we can dig more into this subject, because we can't do it justice in half an hour. No. Bobby, thank you for coming along, and give a quick plug to the Winning Mindset.
Well, I'm just about to go and see me Warrior Teachers now. So I'm teaching now. But if you want to know more about how this works, if you want to understand how this stuff has infected our society, what's enabled it to get where we are, going right back in time and coming right up to the modern day, and also learn how you can fight it, the skills you need to fight these people, then the Winning Mindset is for you. And you can join it by simply filling out the form. You'll see there's a link with a little video explainer at the top of my Twitter profile, which is @HeadWarriorTWM. @HeadWarriorTWM. So that's fairly straightforward. And then if you just say, yeah, I'd like to know a bit more, I can arrange to have a chat with you and talk about whether it's something that you might like to do.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Barry, or should I call you Brian?
Brian Wall.